Chapter 4 is where we're at, coming to a soon close to this book. At this point in the narrative, from chapter 1 up through the last verse of chapter 3, we have seen a very disappointed and dejected Israeli woman by the name of Naomi, who has returned from the far land of Moab with her Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth. And both of them were widows. Both of them were dirt poor. Naomi was bitter, cynical about life. She told folks when she returned to Bethlehem, she told them, "Don't call me Naomi." And Naomi means fruitful. And she said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara." And Mara, of course, means bitter. Life had dealt her bitter fruit in her mind. She said, "I left here years ago fruitful, but now I am empty." So, as we have moved through this narrative, you remember that her Moabite daughter-in-law got a job at in the fields of a certain individual by the name of Boaz. It occurred to Naomi that Boaz was a close relative, and he had been a close relative of her late husband, Elimelech. He had been very kind to Ruth, the Moabitess, and sent home with her a lot of extra grain, which tided them over in their time of poverty. And But Naomi realized that he was a close relative. And in that culture and in that time frame, and in accordance with the law, Boaz had a kinsman right, a kinsman redeemer right to have first dibs on the land that belonged to Elimelech, her late husband. Actually, he didn't have first dibs, and we'll find that out today. Ruth returns to Naomi after he has been kind to her, informs her of the conversation that she had had with him about redemption, redeeming the land, and marrying her. I'm kind of really contracting this. This is the Reader's Digest of the book of Ruth. And the very last thing that Naomi says in verse 18 of this book, this is after Boaz had given assurances that he was going to follow through. Naomi says to Ruth, she said, "Sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day." What thing? He was going to finalize or try to finalize the whole matter of the of redemption of the property and then marriage to Ruth. He was not going to procrastinate on this thing. He was going to follow through, and this was predicted by Naomi. Now, she must have sensed in him a man of decision, because she says, "Have a seat, girl." This guy's going to follow through on this. He was not going to procrastinate. You know, for some folks, they will, for whatever reason, they'll put off even important matters. And it might be just part of their nature. Maybe they just, tomorrow's good enough. It's a good enough day tomorrow to take care of it. And sometimes it goes beyond understanding. Some years ago at another ministry, there was a family that just always seemed to be in trouble. And he had a decent job. The breadwinner of the family had a decent job. But they just didn't seem to manage things well. And they got into trouble financially. And our church, where we were ministering at the time, our church family wanted to help them, and I wanted to help them. And so we took care. I can't remember the nature of the financial obligation, but we went and we paid off something, some mammoth bill that they had. And they were very, 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 very grateful for it. And we were glad to have been of help to him. But then it was a while later, it might have been a year or two later, probably about a year, the guy came to us and with another matter. And this time the house payment was like 3 months late, and the bank is going to foreclose. And this was like the first we had heard about this, for one thing, 3 months into it. And then during the course of conversation, I asked him, well, why didn't you call the bank when you knew you were going to be late? Well, just didn't do it, put it off, and 1 month turned into 2 months, and then turned into 3 months, and it had ballooned on him to a situation. And then they, of course, as many people are when they're in financial pressure, they got depressed. That's a depressing set of circumstances. And so they decided that they just needed to take a break from all of the stress and went on a very expensive vacation. And they just had to have a break. And so anyway, and the rationale was, well, what we're going to spend on vacation isn't going to take care of what we owe anyway, which was true, but it wasn't going to help them any. And so we reached two conclusions about this. Number one, we couldn't help them at this point because it was getting beyond our capacity to do that. And, well, there were other conclusions too, is that they weren't going to take the steps to help themselves, and that it was not going to do us any good if we did it, because they would be back in this very same place again. So life got very rough, and really because they put off important decisions. Didn't follow through. Well, the importance of follow-through is illustrated right here. Naomi predicted it, and that this guy, Boaz, was not going to be, as Romans 12:11 says, not slothful in business. Scripture says, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Proverbs 22, verse 29 says, seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before, the King James uses the word mean. It doesn't mean mean and nasty. It means poor. So Naomi predicted it. And true to form, he, on his own initiative, got the ball rolling. Verse 1 of chapter 4 says, then went Boaz up to the gate, sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by. Unto whom he said, ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So Boaz seized the moment. No time like the present time. He was not a procrastinator. One lady was told that her biggest problem was procrastination, and she said, I don't even know what that big word means. I'll look it up tomorrow. You think about that one. Terry, did you get that one? Okay, good. All right. You're getting better. All right. Not delaying in business. He was not going to be a procrastinator. There's no time like the present. He was not going to miss this opportunity. Someone wrote, you said you'd do it yesterday. Yesterday, you said you'd do it today. Today, you'll push it tomorrow. It's likely tomorrow you'll shift it to someday. Well, it's like the man said, get her done. Get her done. Get going. Getting down to business. And Adrian Rogers said this. He said, procrastination is the grave of opportunity. He had a way with words. Plus, he had a really cool Southern accent. Wisdom, someone said, is knowing what to do next. Skill is knowing how to do it, and virtue is doing it. Well, he decided that this was not going to be delayed. He decided that there's no time like the present, and he decided that he was going to get going. The importance of follow-through. And then we see in verse 1 the working of a plan. He went to the gate. Now, that's odd to us when he talks about that's where he went, was the gate. But this was the right place. This was the place where a decision could be made about this matter. We've had the opportunity, and we never expected to have it. We've had the opportunity to travel and to see things, and we have been in Roman, what was it called, an amphitheater there at Caesarea, and it's a huge place where they used to have entertainment events, and it was right by, you're looking out in the Mediterranean Sea this way, and then it's just beautiful. And you'd think with the ocean in the background you wouldn't be able to hear well, but the acoustics are wonderful. We were way up in the top, and you could hear people down on the main staging area where the Romans used to gather. These kinds of places, these amphitheaters and or coliseums or theaters or meeting places, they were pretty common in Roman cities and settlements. Jewish settlements were not built that way. If you went into a Jewish town, and this is based on the excavations that they found, they're pretty close together. Little lanes through them and all of this, and the homes and dwellings are really kind of compacted. But one area where people did gather was around the gates. It was an open area right there at the entrance of the city. It was where a lot of people could gather, where business took place. Sometimes people set up shops and, little places where they could sell things and so on. But that was at the gates, and all of the city business was done at the gates of those Israeli cities. Hence, all of the references in the Old Testament, especially to the gates. You've probably read that in the book of Psalms, especially, or in other places. Psalm 87:2, the Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. The gates of Zion, where the decisions were going to be made. Psalm 122, verse 2, our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. Proverbs chapter 8 and verse 3 has wisdom personified. Wisdom says, she crieth at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in at the doors. Why there? Because that's the place where decisions were made for the nation, for the city, and where things were decided. The virtuous woman in Proverbs chapter 31, verse 23 says, her husband is known as in the gates, where he sitteth among the elders of the land. The idea is that because of her testimony, he is referenced in the gates of the city, where all the news was shared, where people came to hear what was going on. I don't know if they had a town crier back then, but probably that was the place where a lot of gossip was shared as well, as current news. It was where everything was happening. So he went to the right place, and he sought the right person. He beheld the kinsman, verse 1 again, that Boaz spake of it. And then he says, ho, such a one. Kind of an odd thing to say. But essentially he's saying, hey, you're just the guy I want to talk to. You the man. And so he calls him. He says, sit down here. I want to talk to you. And so they did. He broke off his journey, sat down by Boaz. So he sought out the right person, and he followed the right procedure. He took 10 men of the city, verse 2. 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit you down here. And they sat down. Now, it sounds like he's bossing people around, but that's not the case at all. That's why they were there, to see what business was going down. And so a standard operating procedure of having business, an official thing to do in business, was to gather up some of the elders and have them sit and be judging, not so much jury, but they were there to be witnesses and to give any input that they needed to give or ask questions and so on. And the questions, of course, are about Naomi's property. If you look at verse 4, he says, Boaz says to this guy, and I thought to advertise these, saying, buy it, or excuse me, look back up to verse 3. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, to let you know about it, buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there's none to redeem it besides you, and I am after you. And he said, I'll do it. I'll redeem this. So these verses here, I mean, they do leave open some questions about Naomi's property that I haven't really, there's so many people on one side or another. For instance, has she already sold the land and is relinquishing her rights to the land? Has she not yet sold her land and is now selling the land? One commentator said Naomi might have already sold the land because of her poverty, though if this had happened, it seems strange that Boaz could purchase it without the buyer being involved at all in the discussions. I guess what I'm doing is sharing that it's really not as clear as we'd like it to be about exactly what had happened. There's some that said her husband had sold the land to get money to be able to make his journey to Moab and get established there. But we really don't know. And does it matter? No. The fact is that whether she was currently selling it or whatever, still the Redeemer still had to step in if it was going to stay in the family. So this is what he's, and everybody's familiar with it. And we talked about this last time as we went back in the Old Testament. So, and of course, the meaning of redemption is to pay a price for. When you go to the store, you are redeeming. In a sense, if you're buying a gallon of milk, it belongs to the store. Currently, you are paying money and purchasing it, and it is now yours. So it is no longer their property, it is now yours. You have redeemed it. So that's the case. That's what he presents this man with. He said, you're first in line. You're a closer relative, and we don't know what the proximity was. I mean, maybe Boaz was a second cousin, and this guy was a cousin. I don't know. It's hard to say. They kept probably much closer tabs on relatives than we do. I wouldn't go throw this in, but after all, you're here, and I'm in charge right now, and I got the power. Now, I got some correspondence on Facebook with a relative of mine that I just found out she was a relative about, 5 months ago or so, not very long. She's on the Ancestry.com, and one or two of my kids got me one of them little vials you spit in and send in to Ancestry, and so they posted that. I put my spit in the thing and sent it in, and so found out that I've got this second cousin. But she is the great granddaughter of the brother of my grandmother's brother. Okay. Anyway. But she sent me like this boatload of pictures that they had, and I'm cycling through those pictures, and of course I don't know any of those. I never met her father, which was my great uncle, or her grandfather, which was my great uncle. Never met him, but lo and behold, as I'm cycling through there, here is a picture of my grandmother and my great uncle, who I had met. My Uncle Darrell, my grandmother Thelma, and a woman that I just found out about really just a matter of months ago, who was my mother's namesake. She had been sister-in-law to a former sister-in-law. My great-great-grandfather divorced her after World War I or so, and long, complicated story, it doesn't matter. But this was the woman that my mother was named after. Does that have anything to do with the message? No. I just thought it was, It's about people and connections. Oh, I know how it connected. We don't know how close this guy was, okay? Might have been a cousin. Boaz a second cousin. We're just not told. But he's first in line. And so Boaz knows that, goes to him and says, okay, you're first in line. And said, okay, so I'm gonna redeem that. Well, then it gets a little more complicated. Boaz says to him in verse 5, concerning the matter of Ruth, then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must also buy it of Ruth, the Moabitess. Remember, Ruth was married to Naomi's son, she is the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. Now look back at Deuteronomy chapter 5, and you'll see the basis for this, what he's talking about here. In chapter 25 of Deuteronomy and verse 5, there's a law there. And remember, this was God's land that he had allocated to the various tribes and families of Israel. And he wanted it to stay within those tribes and those families. So, Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, if brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, the wife of the dead shall not marry without unto a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife, and perform the duty of an husband's brother unto her. And it shall be that the firstborn which she beareth shall succeed in the name of his brother which is dead, that his name be not put out of Israel. So, this is what Boaz is bringing up to this guy. There's a law about keeping this land within the family, and he was the closest relative, and so it fell upon him to do this. This is called levirate law, meaning the brother of a man who had died childless was required to marry the widow. This is what was the Pharisees that came to Jesus and said, hey, if a guy dies and his wife marries his brother and then that guy dies, you remember how that whole, and like 6 times, and they didn't have any children, whose wife shall they be in the resurrection? They're trying to trip, but this is what it's based on, this levirate marriage matter. Now, the kinsman didn't anticipate that. He hadn't thought about that. And so there was an issue there of self-interest. He says, the kinsman said, I can't redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine inheritance. Now, he did have initial interest there before he found out about Ruth. And his dilemma was this. He said he's going to mar his inheritance. What that meant is that if he married Ruth, had a child by her, that child became the heir of the dead relative. Hence, the land eventually would go to that child. So what the proposal was this, okay, here's my dilemma. I'm going to buy this land. Oh, this gal's here, I got to marry her, but if I have a child, then all of the land that I'm buying with my money is going to go, the land's going to be his, and everything I've paid out is going to be his because it was considered his in the first place in the family line. So anyway you looked at it, it was a bad financial deal for him. Wasn't going to pay off at all. He had a dilemma. So he says, okay, I can't redeem this. I can't redeem my right. It's going to mess up my inheritance if I do that. And so you do it. It's all yours. And someone commented that the fact that Ruth was a Moabitess might have been bothering him. He might not have cared too much for that aspect of things. Do you remember who Boaz's mother was? Some of you know. I can see it. You're Rahab, who was a Canaanite. And they suggested that maybe Boaz didn't have a problem with the fact that she was a Moabitess because his mother was a Canaanite and married into the family. Of course, that's speculation. But it might have made him a little less reticent to marry Ruth. So here's the situation. The guy yields up his right, and so they seal the deal. And it says in verse 7, now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off a shoe and gave it to his neighbor. And this was the testimony. Well, somebody might call that a shoe-in. You think? Buying, okay. Confirm all things, this is what they do. And the idea perhaps with this, with buying the land, is that the shoe represented everywhere you could walk. that was suggested that maybe the origin of giving your shoe over was, especially if you're buying property, was that now, the bottom of the shoe, wherever it would go, is now mine. Maybe that's it. We really don't know. But apparently it was something that they used to do, even in this day, when Ruth was written. This was the way they did business back there. So, therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. And moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among the brethren and from the gate of his place. Ye are witnesses this day. They accepted it, exchanged the shoe, and then Boaz says, you are all witnesses this day. Now notice in verse 11, and all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. And they say this, the Lord make the woman that is come unto thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So all the people had gathered. Apparently, what I think happened was when Boaz said, hey guys, sit down here, had the kinsmen sit down, and when they started talking about this, I think word spread quick. And I think people gathered around. Because apparently it was more than just the elders that saw this transaction taking place. The Bible says it was the people that were in that entryway, that plaza, and they all gathered around. And Boaz makes an appeal to all of them. You are witnesses of this. Purchasing of the land, the agreement to marry Ruth, and they said we are. Now why did he do this? Well, why did Boaz make such a big deal of this? Well, I think in part because he didn't want any misunderstanding later. He wanted everyone present to vouch for what had happened, that it was all done on the up and up, and everybody knew about it. This was not meant to be a private matter for everybody concerned. Now, I don't doubt that a lot of the ladies, when they were gathered around, would talk about, hey, wouldn't Boaz and Ruth make such a sweet couple? I don't doubt that happened. Oh, don't they look cute together? That kind of thing. I don't doubt that was happening. But maybe some of them said, Ma, he's a lot older than her. It's probably never going to happen. And then the thing that they had talked about was coming to pass, and I think it gathered a crowd. And Boaz announces they all witnessed the deal. And he says, I want you to vouch for witnesses. And they said, we are. It was proof. If I do a private sale, and maybe you do this as well, depending on what it is, of course, but if I do a private sale, I get a receipt. I'm not talking about from a retail place. I'm talking about between individuals. I get a receipt, and they get a receipt, and they sign it. And it's not a matter of trust at that point, although if it's a stranger, you don't know if you can trust them or not. It's a matter of just having proof that, hey, this transaction took place. I would encourage Christians to do that. If there's some kind of a business deal, depending on what it is, of course, but it shouldn't be a matter of, well, you don't trust me. In fact, I get suspicious when somebody says that, because this is just good policy to do that. The proof is there, even if it's family. To say, okay, if somebody in the family says, I need to borrow some money, can you help me out? Sure. Write it down. It doesn't, and just vouch for it. Because I know personally of issues within families where money has been borrowed and never paid back, or it was just been forgotten about. And then people don't want to bring it up because they don't want to have family tensions, or memories get blurred about what was said and what wasn't said. If it's written down, you don't have to worry about that. Boaz is throwing this out before everybody in the room and say, everybody's a witness, right? This is what happened. Everybody understand? Yes, we are. And we approve. This is why they give this blessing here. May your house be like Rachel and Leah, which built the whole nation, and may it be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah. That was a levirate marriage as well. And many of these people in Bethlehem were relatives, as was Boaz, a relative of Pharez. So, he went in question marks later, no doubts, and there was universal approval of that. So, you remember, I don't know, it's been a message or two that I preached about the element of time, that all of this observation, all of this, what was going on, people getting to know one another, they knew Boaz, they knew that he was a good, kind, and generous man with integrity, but they had also gotten to know Ruth. And back in chapter 3, Boaz, when all of this was being discussed, and he said, now my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest, for all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. The element of time and getting to know one another and respect, and then be able to draw conclusions. These two people belong together. And that was approved by the entire village, by the entire town of Bethlehem, and finalized. I think we got probably one more message in the book of Ruth, but I hope you've appreciated it thus far. Wedding bells are coming up for them, and so we'll take that up next time. Father, thank you for our time together, and I pray that you might bless. The word to our hearts and our lives. Help us to act when we should act, to not procrastinate, to do as Boaz did, to do business soon and get matters settled, and not to wait upon them, not to presume upon them. Pray your blessing upon our time together as we pray together and bring others before your throne of grace. In Christ's name, amen. All right.